On this episode, we visit the World Health Organization in Geneva to learn about road safety. Then we visit the International Road Federation in Geneva. Stay tuned.
We're in Geneva talking with Malaki Kayesi with WHO. What is WHO?
WHO stands for the World Health Organization.
And what does the World Health Organization do?
The World Organization works really on the global health, providing policy guidance as well as technical support on health issues to member states.
And what is your position with them?
Here I'm a technical officer working in the Department of Violence and Injury Prevention and Disability.
Now, why is the World Health Organization concerned about road safety?
Road safety is a public health problem because we are talking about a threat to life. It's a health problem. We are talking about loss of life. We are talking about death, injuries, and disability. So it's a major public health problem that we really need to address as a health sector.
How big a problem is it?
Yes, we are talking about 1.24 million people dying due to road traffic crashes each year.
How many of those are pedestrians and other vulnerable road users?
Pedestrians form about 22% of the global death, but when you put together pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, it comes to about 50% of the global death.
What is WHO doing about road safety?
We do provide technical support to member states. They ask us for guidance. We are also producing manuals of good practice, which really give direction and guidance to member states. We conduct an assessment of the global status of road safety. This we've done it twice. We've had 2 reports, which helps us to see where we are with regard to policies, with enforcement, and the magnitude of the problem. In addition, we do have some specific programs we are working on in countries where we support implementation of programs. We have a program supported by the Bloomberg Philanthropies in 10 countries where we really work on very specific risk factors like speed, like helmets, like drinking and driving, where we really go in to address it from a more practical perspective to implement measures to address this issue. So overall, we are dealing not just with the sharing of information or conducting advocacy or awareness raising, but we do work on very practical aspects to make sure that we address it both by knowledge available, but also making sure that we conduct practical measures to demonstrate what can be done to address the problem of road safety.
And you mentioned working with the Bloomberg Philanthropies in 10 different countries. Do you find that different countries have different problems and need different approaches to solve those problems?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is that the problems are shared. When you are looking at speed, is still a key problem, whether you are in Vietnam or Cambodia or Kenya. The main difference is the context, the institutional capability, the resources available, and the capacity. So it's really the context that we do as much as we can to improve or provide technical support, provide planning support, provide information. But we are dealing with a universal problem that has to be addressed in different countries, in different contexts, in different enforcement contexts, different political contexts. So this may make the difference, but the point I'm stressing is that speed, alcohol is a universal issue that has to be addressed by all countries.
Why is speed a problem when it comes to road safety? What is it about speed?
Speed is a major killer. In fact, in the literature, in various studies, we try to define it as a number 1 killer because just a slight increase in speed, for example, 2% or 3%, will increase substantially both those who are killed and those who are seriously injured. So it's really associated with infrastructure, it's associated with the motor vehicles, it's associated with behavior. So it's a number 1, a major risk factor that we have to address.
And we're a couple of years into the Decade of Action for Road Safety. What's the role of WHO in the Decade of Action?
The World Health Organization really plays a coordinating role. We work with other UN agencies, particularly the United Nations Economic Commissions, to provide a coordinating role to mobilize groups, to mobilize countries, mobilize various agencies that are interested in road safety. So we play more of a coordinating role, but we also recognize that there are certain areas where countries require specific technical role. So we have a major role, we call it in WHO a convening role. So this is really a major role we play in the Decade of Action. We are providing the secretariat to the Decade of Action for Road Safety. And plus many other administrative communication issues, as well as where there is need, we do give some real technical support, questions on enforcement, questions on various measures that can be implemented.
What are the goals of the Decade for Action?
The Decade of Action is really aiming at reducing road traffic fatalities by 50%. You see, this is the overall goal, but from a practical point of view, is to mobilize countries, mobilize various agencies to take appropriate action, a proactive action to try and reduce road traffic crashes and fatalities in different countries of the world.
Earlier this year, WHO came out with a couple of publications dealing with pedestrians. What were those publications?
Yes, we have two main ones. One is the Pedestrian Safety Manual, quite a nice, voluminous, over 100 pages, that tells us about the magnitude of the problem, the risk factors, and the various measures that we can implement. And in that manual, we have very specific examples from different countries to show that change, improvement can be achieved. In addition to this manual, a huge over 100 pages, we have a small advocacy document that is talking about making walking safe. So it summarizes the information you have in the manual, but very precise, very targeted, which can be used for advocacy. So we call it an advocacy document. We have these two main documents. In addition to this, we produce the Global Status Report on Road Safety, which is not just focusing on pedestrians, but it does cover aspects on pedestrians, but provides additional information on the global issues or global status of road safety. So these are very useful documents to us. So we have two specific pedestrian. We have the overall road safety global status report, and we do have one or two others that has come out related to the area of legislation, not specific to pedestrians, but it does cover things that are relevant. So you can actually see we do a lot in generating and sharing information that can be used around the world.
What sort of things can be done to make conditions better for pedestrians?
Yes, we begin with a very basic issue that walking is so crucial. Just even for this interview, we walked, and everybody really is participating in a way, initiates or part of his trip involves walking. So if you look at it that way, we need to make walking safe by providing the necessary infrastructure. This would be a sidewalk that separates pedestrians from motorized traffic. So it's so crucial that we provide this. So there are several engineering measures separating pedestrians, making it easy for pedestrians to cross the street. These are really the crossings that we talk about, reducing speed through traffic calming measures. Then we have enforcement measures that should complement this, and awareness raising or educational measures. So it's a whole package of measures that we need to initiate. Sometimes the question is, where do you begin? We really strongly argue that we need to begin somewhere. If there's no pedestrian sidewalk, let a city council, a government, really begin with that. There are some rules that can be enforced, drinking and driving or speed enforcement, the government, any government should be able to do something. So basically I'm underlying the fact that there is something each one of us can do as a state, city level, national level, subnational level to improve pedestrian safety anywhere in the world. Even an institution can do something. So this really, we cannot talk of lack of what to do. It could just be a question that we are not doing it.
Speed, we know, is very important for safety, but sometimes when you improve roads, the dirt road finally becomes paved. Sometimes there's a natural inclination for speed to increase. What can be done to avoid that happening? That better roads might lead to a reduction in safety just because speeds go up.
In fact, you are raising a common problem that any time we have improvement in the road infrastructure, improvement of roads, either new roads or renovating old roads or maintaining them, we see almost ushering in of high rates of crashes. So it's as if it's a price that society is almost accepting that anytime you improve the road, then we have to almost accommodate. But we are simply saying that we shouldn't really tolerate this kind of thinking. Any new road really should include adequate infrastructure and measures for pedestrian safety. For sure, many low and middle income countries that are commonly known as developing countries are investing substantially in road infrastructure, which is necessary for the economic development as well as social. And of course, even politicians, use this to argue that they're developing a country, which I acknowledge is important. However, these don't have adequate infrastructure for pedestrians. And there are many, many examples. You know of the development aid or loans that are going into improvement in infrastructure to improve connectivity or connection in these countries, but they don't have adequate measures. There are many examples we can give of Africa where we see roads that are being developed, but we are just concerned that road safety is not adequate. We see several roads in Asia, in South America. So we are concerned that road development should not be done at the expense of pedestrian safety and road safety. So this is why you see us saying that, look, don't just look at access mobility. The typical planning or engineering model where the shortest distance is crucial. You must reach your destination within the shortest time possible and with the least effort. We call it the shortest distance. Now, this concept, pervades so that speed is almost naturally built into the design, the thinking, the planning. And you are saying, no, look, engineers, listen to us also. There is road safety. We need to harmonize, reconcile between safety, accessibility, and reachability of places. So the bottom line is that we cannot compromise safety at the expense of access in transport planning. So the roads we are seeing, the infrastructure we are seeing need to be rethought. Why should I kill 3,000 people every year on a road in a country? And in some countries we are talking about 10,000 people. In others, 15,000. Is it worthy? What economic development are we talking about if it's leading to death? More medical care, more social impact. There's a big problem. There's a question we need to raise with that kind of development. Now, this is what we are talking about from a health perspective, that economic development should not be achieved on the back of road safety.
We're in Geneva talking with Ian Webb, who's Director General of the International Road Federation. What is the International Road Federation?
Well, John, the International Road Federation is an association of companies and government agencies that are obviously interested in roads. It's been around since 1948, and I guess it's fair to say that it's one of the leading international organisations in this space.
And just what do you do for your members?
In the past, it was always thought that our members would get benefit by our being advocates for them. But in point of fact, that's no longer really what we do. Our job really is to work with governments on getting progressive developments on transport systems. So the idea of our going out and being a lobby for big road builders is really a thing of the past. It doesn't happen anymore.
And how has your perspective changed? It's not just big roads anymore. What else do you look at?
Well, we're interested in safer roads and better transport systems for the community, and that's where you come in, because a lot of what we do is actually about pedestrians and about amenity, safer, faster, cheaper, more efficient transport, and integrated transport systems, not simply cars and trucks.
So when countries modernizing its transportation system, how might they do things differently today than 20 or 30 years ago in terms of bringing pedestrians and other users into the picture when they build roads?
Well, we've seen huge change in those last 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years ago, when IRF was, say, 20 years old, 60 years old now. 20 or 30 years ago, our function was all about building more roads. We didn't have safety systems, seatbelts hadn't even been thought of, let alone speed cameras or drink driving laws or safety for pedestrians. Pedestrian crossings 20 or 30 years ago were pretty elementary things. So all of that has changed, and we've seen enormous change in the services we provide for pedestrians, especially in developing countries. So in the United States, Europe, Australia, the UK, we're seeing a very different world for pedestrians, not simply in safety but in amenity and their access to public transport. That unfortunately has been matched with a huge increase in cars in the third world, so that road safety and access to pedestrians in places like India is now a huge problem and swiftly rising from about the 6th leading cause of death in India to the point where within the next 20 years, certainly maybe even within 10 years, it'll be number 2 or 3 cause of death in India. Now, when you think of the size of a country like India, to have road accidents rise to something like the 2nd leading cause of death is tragic, and most of those deaths are pedestrians. So we've made huge progress in the developed world. We've got a long way to go in the third world.
What's the impact of that on a country, not just the deaths, but the people who are injured, perhaps permanently disabled?
Well, the numbers, as you're suggesting, multiply, because if you talk about the number of people actually killed on the roads, it's one figure. The number of people permanently injured and the effects on their family and the loss of the breadwinner, all of this is catastrophic. Other aspects to that, unfortunately, are that in the developing world, the access to ambulance services and hospitals and immediate medical attention is a big problem. So a huge number of people, pedestrians, die on the roads in the third world that would live if they had been struck by a vehicle elsewhere in the world.
IRF has become more aware of this. Do you find your members are also becoming more aware of these issues?
Oh yes. For example, we have one of our largest members, most active members, is India. The chairman of IRF Geneva at the present time is an Indian gentleman. The Indian government's giving this a huge priority. I mean, if the sort of numbers and the sort of catastrophe that they're facing is calamitous for India. So this really, it would be very hard to exaggerate how important this is, and they see it as important. And so we publish, for example, we're about to publish another set of road safety cards that are issued to children in schools, teach them about road safety, how they should cross the road, how they should look, how they should behave. And also that's combined with stuff such as trying to encourage people, if they see an accident, to actually stop and give assistance. As I mentioned, one of the greatest problems is not simply the accident, but whether they can get immediate help. Unfortunately, in large parts of the third world, when there is an accident, people don't stop and render assistance. So that's something that we've got to include in our programs, and we're very active on that. So, for example, quite recently, we suggested to the government of India that they should change the legislation so that if you do stop and you render assistance to a person who's been hit by the side of the road and that person unfortunately dies, you cannot be sued by the family for the fact that you rendered assistance. So the problem with a lot of this is that people feel that they'd face an issue of liability, and so they don't render assistance because they think that they could be held responsible if this person happened to die or be permanently injured.
What do you see coming up in the future?
Well, it'd be interesting to say that what I see is more of the same, but I don't. I think that just as we've seen a huge change in the last 20 years, as we've moved to integrated systems and integrating public transport with motorised vehicles and trucks and so forth, just as we've seen that, I think that we're on the edge of the biggest change that we have seen in transport for 100 years. We are on the edge of saying goodbye to the automobile as we know it. That's a huge statement. It's often believed that we've made huge progress in the last 100 years, and of course we have. We've made great progress in areas such as communication. We've made huge progress in areas such as education and health and things of that nature. But we haven't made huge progress in the fundamental things about how we live and how we transport ourselves. You've got to remember the internal combustion engine was invented 100 years ago. We've all been flying around now for nearly 100 years. We've all been driving automobiles for nearly 100 years, and they're almost exactly the same as they were 100 years ago. And we sort of live with this and we expect that that's the way it's always going to be, but it's about to change. What is going to happen, and it's hard to put a year on it specifically, but the process is underway. What is going to happen is that within the next 10 years, 20 years for sure, we're going to see the large-scale introduction of driverless technology. Driverless cars, driverless buses, driverless trucks. And these driverless vehicles are going to be much safer than the cars that you and I happen to drive. So they are not going to hit pedestrians anywhere nearly as much.
And behind us here we have a poster for the Decade of Action for Road Safety. What's been the IRF role in that?
Well, we've been very, obviously, you've got the poster there behind us. It's a key issue for us. Our biggest initiatives on the Decade for Action for Road Safety have, in fact, been, as I mentioned earlier, the work we're doing in the third world in trying to improve education for kids in schools, driver awareness and driver knowledge. But you need to know that in that, the relatively cheap access that the whole world now has to motor vehicles, so that anyone can buy one, and just about anyone can go out on the road and do their bit. But unfortunately, the infrastructure that should go with that is very, very expensive and simply is not available in the third world. even in the developed world, and again, most people are not aware of this, they imagine that even in the developed world, when you go out and have a car accident, it's because you're a bad driver or you were drunk or whatever. And there are statistics which do show that alcohol is a dangerous mix. Alcohol and fatigue and these issues are high. But nevertheless, about 40% of all of the fatalities in a country like Australia, which is typical of the developed world, 40% are single are accidents in which no other vehicle or pedestrian is involved. So these are driver run-off road situations. And of those, many of those accidents are due to the infrastructure that the driver is driving on. So for example, on major freeways, if we had sand runoff areas on the sides, these guys, when they go to sleep at the wheel, would just drive into the sand and they'd live. So our infrastructure plays a huge part in our fatalities, not simply for the pedestrians who are unfortunate enough to be struck by these guys, but the fact that the infrastructure does not save the driver. And of course, that's something that our governments don't say too much about, because the cost of fixing that is enormous. But we have picked all the low-hanging fruit. To return to the point that I made a moment ago, having picked the low-hanging fruit, it is not the time now for us to try and improve seat belts. Not that I don't think that's a bad thing, but we have other priorities. It's now too hard for us to make big improvements by building better speed cameras, by improving signage, by improving road barriers and all this kind of stuff. The cost of that is too great. If I had to work on how I would spend the world's billions now, it would be on two things. Educating people in the third world to avoid the pedestrians being struck and killed on the roads, and that's a community education thing, and that's a high priority. And the second is to bring on the driverless car, because that will save more people's lives than anything that we've ever done.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.